Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky. We're back this week for another episode of Joe and Joe Illustrated, where I go through every issue of G.I. Joe Real American Hero in sequential order, and this time we're focusing on issue 151, and we go page by page, panel by panel, to break down how a comic book works artistically. You know, going back to the original mission statement of the illustrated episodes was, you know, not every comic can be The Dark Knight Returns, but every comic, many creators spent many hours crafting it, and there's a lot of unseen craft that goes into what I feel into the pages of every single comic book, whether it's considered, you know, a classic of the era or just another issue of an ongoing series. So that's kind of the inspiration for why I've been doing illustrated and doing them in this fashion. So as we near 155, I just kind of want to reiterate that and lock that back into my memory banks. Cause you know, you do 150 of these and, you know, you find yourself going, yeah, that happens on this page and let's move on. And, so I always want to remind myself. And so I always hope that every episode of my show, I find something in at least one or two or three of the pages of each issue that kind of teaches us a little bit about comic books and teaches us a little bit about the language of comic books and how that artist was, you know, setting up a page, or how that or the writer, you know, and obviously most of the time Larry. Although something in the letters page for this issue was shocking to read that I didn't recall, you know, how Larry planned things and the pace of the story and kind of the craftsmanship behind it, you know, without any insider background, just from a translator perspective, from a reader perspective, which is who I am. So for you new listeners, welcome aboard. For you old listeners, thank you so much for listening. You guys find me on social medias at Joe on Joe Pod, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com. I'd love it if you rated and reviewed the show. That always helps bring visibility to the show. I did guest star on another podcast this week and last week. It was a two-parter. It's called What's Eating Cyclops. I was going to say it's called Cyclops is Waiting for Me. What's Eating Cyclops? That's an amazing title for a podcast, though. An X-Men podcast called What's Eating Cyclops. But I was, and it's hosted by the Blob, and it's just culinary dishes in the X world. So I was a guest on my friend JC and Rod's wonderful X-Men related podcast, X-Men animated series specifically podcast called Cyclops is Waiting for Me. So it's the Nightcrawler two-parter episodes. I know what you're saying, you X-Men fans. Nightcrawler was just a one-part show, though. Why would you guys do 2 episodes on it? And that's because yours truly likes to talk. I had a lot of interjections. Hopefully, many of them funny. Hopefully, they weren't too annoying. And it drug their show out from what was normally like a 40-minute to a full-blown 2-hour extravaganza. And we had a lot of fun, though. We had a lot of laughs. And we dove into some deep X-Men knowledge, stuff I tend to not get into on this show a little bit. So it was nice to flex those different muscles. So give them a listen, please. It's called Cyclops is Waiting for Me. The Nightcrawler episodes, they've dropped this week of December 5th and last week as well. So hopefully that'll entertain you and see me and see my brain flex in a slightly different fashion. And while you are doing other podcast interviews and other podcast, checking out other podcast recommendations, please always check out our sponsor podcast, the Movies and a Meal podcast. They're the best.
Listeners, I know what you need in your life. You need more podcasts. And you also love movies. So why not do a podcast that's about not one movie? It's about not 2 movies. It's about 3 movies and a meal. I'm talking the Movies and a Meal podcast. This show is great. It's brought to you by Keith, Brad, and Ben, and each week they bring a new movie to the table, which they all discuss as a group. And it's not, you know, your highfalutin movies. It's What We Do in the Shadows, The Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and Out of Sight. You know, it's Bad Education, Ghost Rider, and A View to a Kill. It's X-Men Last Stand, Queen Sugar, The Mandalorian, and Major League 2. They are a lot of fun to listen to. You guys know Ben. It's our friend Ben Pensarga. He was a guest on Joe and Joe. In fact, Ben was the very first remote guest that I ever had on this podcast, so he's always got a special place in my heart. I'm really digging this. I just started listening to it last week. It is a lot of fun. They bring a guest in. The guest, I listened to their Heathers episode. They were joined by Kelly, and she went in depth on her favorite movie, which was Heathers, and it made me want to go watch Heathers to watch with them. I really dig it. So guys, find them out there at Movies and a Meal, Twitter, Instagram. Their website is moviesandameal.podbean.com. They put out one episode a week. Give them a listen, guys. Support them. Let them know Joe on Joe sent you. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. It is quite entertaining. And now back to the show.
They always have great stuff to say about the latest movies out in the theaters, and very oftentimes a lot of the big shows, stuff like Andor. They're probably going to be talking about Willow at some point, probably once more episodes drop. I know we started watching that in our house. I still haven't watched the Game of Thrones one and the new Lord of the Rings one. So I'm jumping both of those AAA fantasy ones to the Lord of the Rings knockoff, Willow. I'm just kidding, Willow. It's a fine show. And let's see what else. I was at the Los Angeles Comic-Con this past weekend, and we were at a fabulous G.I. Joe panel on Sunday morning. Maybe some of you were there, where the fabulously talented Larry Houston, Buzz Dixon, and Jamie Sullivan were there. Speaking of X-Men, of course, Larry Houston, probably best known as I don't know if he's officially was the art director or just lead show designer on the X-Men animated series. He was a big part of that. But Larry Houston worked on G.I. Joe extensively, and very most famously designed and storyboarded and drew the greatest opening sequence to any animated feature of all time. And we're talking about the G.I. Joe movie opening sequence. So he was there. He talked about that a little bit. Shared some great anecdotes. Buzz Dixon was there as well. Talked about how he got into it. And the great Jamie Sullivan, who's doing the covers and just did that record-breaking, literally Guinness World Record-breaking cover for G.I. Joe 300. He was there. It was great to hear them talk about G.I. Joe. Just nice to be in a room talking G.I. Joe. A couple things came out from it. One, with Jamie Sullivan, complete and utter fanboyness, I guess, would be of the property. You know, he's our age. That means he's a spry young man. No, he's our age, and he grew up with G.I. Joe just like we did, and it absolutely shines through just seeing him discuss it and seeing him talk about the property. There, you know, there's a joy in his voice, and an awe in his voice to be able to work on this property that means so much to him. So we appreciate that a lot. I really did. And the other thing that he said, which was shocking to me, I don't pay much attention to the sales charts, like the diamond sales charts. Many of you may know this information, but I don't really pay attention to that. So I don't look to compare. I do know that overall, you know, your most popular books tend to sell, let's say 50,000 comics. You know, there's a few that go a little bit more. Most hover around there, I believe. You know, and comics are shrinking. We get it. You know, the market itself is big, but your monthly comic book every week renewed, those numbers are shrinking. So I don't mean to sound like a rube here, but when he said that the average subscription for G.I. Joe was 6,000 copies. That's right, kids. You heard me. 6,000 copies of the G.I. Joe comic. Not for 300. I guess they printed an absolute ton of those, but for your average normal run of the mill issue. That was a shocking number to me. That really took me by surprise. I guess I just thought there was more of us. I know G.I. Joe's not been a huge seller in recent years, you know, not for a long time. I get it. Obviously back in the day, it was, you know, the book that floated Marvel through the early 80s, selling close to 500,000. I understand that. But I would never have guessed that it was under 10 grand ever. And in his words, he said, really realistically, a lot of it's used just to keep a lot of copyrights in place. It's kind of a loss leader in that regard, where they need to establish copyrights for many of the characters. So that's why they get used. So we know that 300 is the last issue from IDW. We know it's moving somewhere else. I did find out also that apparently it's common knowledge that it's going to Skybound. I guess it was in the trade somewhere. I don't remember seeing this as a definitive thing, but everyone that we were talking to G.I. Joe wise was in the mix on this. So I know I've talked about that on the show where I had a pretty good inclination that that's where it was going. To Kirkman's thing, I guess he's really been trying to get G.I. Joe and Transformers for a long time, but I don't remember seeing any official notice. But a friend of the show, Jeremiah, said, yeah, it was written up in Variety. I guess there was something about it, but I don't know, that escaped my news. That might be, good listener, why I don't do like news segments on this show. I don't do weekly G.I. Joe in the news segments because I don't pay attention to that stuff. But you know, hopefully we'll find out some actual publication details soon, wherever their next home is, because I don't want to go too long without some G.I. Joe, new G.I. Joe in our hands, because right now we're looking back at
You were saying?
old G.I. Joe, and that is G.I. Joe number 151, which is cover dated August of 1994. New listeners, this segment is I look at comic books that were on the shelf the same month as G.I. Joe, in this case 151, and we also take a quick peek at movies that were in the theater that same month. So to kind of put you in a mental place of where we were at on an entertainment perspective. So put your mental head back. Cover dated of August 94 was technically, it was June of 1994. So remember where you were in June of 1994, and you were walking into the comic shop and you looked at all the Marvel comics, and there was Snake Eyes throwing mask, costumeless, really, Cobra Commander. You wouldn't know it's Cobra Commander based on this cover. Throwing him against the wall. And what other Marvel comics are you seeing? A really important comic book you're seeing is Incredible Hulk 420. This is where Hulk's friend Jim passes away from the AIDS virus. Jim had been a supporting member of the Hulk team, you know, like randomly showing up for a while. I think he first appeared in mid-70s or very early 80s as a younger kid. And Peter David, the writer, had brought him back into the series of late. And this is the issue where I believe earlier they had revealed that Jim was afflicted with AIDS. And this is the issue where he passed. So it's a very stark cover. It's all in black. It's got an AIDS ribbon on the front. And then there's a light, like a hospital light that casts shadow with the Hulk standing over the bedside of his friend. It's a very wonderfully well-written, delicately written comic book by a really, really talented writer. So it's an important book, and one of the reasons I bring it up also as well is that very talented writer, Peter David, recently has suffered, I believe, a series of strokes and is recovering or is hospitalized from this. So this was shared on social media, so we're not putting anything out there that he is in recovery. I know Todd Nock has listed some things for to raise money, some of his original artwork to raise money to help Peter's family out during this time. Sorry, I don't have any more links to any of that beyond it, but I wanted to mention it because I've enjoyed Peter David's work since this Hulk stuff, since before this Hulk stuff. I think he is really a singular voice, a very unique voice in comic books. Never flashy, but always solid, workmanlike, and identifiable as a writer. And that's really rare to do in a world dominated by the visuals. Peter's writing has always really stood out as Peter's writing. You could put, there's very few writers that work that way. Stan Lee was one of them, for real. Say what you will about, you know, his some of his prose, especially in later years, but his words always stood out. I think Roy Thomas, similar. Chris Claremont, Peter David absolutely works in that category. Neil Gaiman, you know, he's you can kind of tell his flourishes as a writer. And Bendis, simply because the side dialogues. But for real, Peter David's a talent. So whatever. Doubt this will reach his ears or his family's ears, but all help and all recovery. I've been a big fan of his work for a long time, so let's send him well wishes and hope he recovers. We are also looking at this month. Oh, Venom crosses over with Nightwatch. Nightwatch, the Spawn knockoff from the Spider-Verse. Anytime you need a bump in sales during this time, let's get Venom in the mix. This is a great book. This is a book that for years people didn't believe existed. You would say the words and they would go, that didn't really happen. And then you would laugh and go, of course it did. And it's fabulous. It's Punisher meets Archie was on the shelf this month. It's great. It was a real crossover. It really happened. It is awesome. And the premise of the story is there's a killer in New York who the Punisher is on the tail, like a criminal who's the Punisher is chasing. And that criminal happens to be a dead ringer for Archie Andrews. And by that, I mean, they just draw his, in the Punisher style, they draw his face to look exactly like the Archie Andrews style of comic. So Punisher tracks him down to Riverdale, and he thinks that Archie is this criminal that he was tracking down in New York. So that's how Punisher crosses paths with Archie. It's awesome. It's great. The original print actually ran kind of expensive for a while. They did a reprint of it. And then it's since cooled down quite a bit. You can find copies of this, for relatively inexpensive, not cover price, but relatively inexpensive. I have a feeling this is the kind of book that one day will again pop, because it's just crazy and wild. And the more people generationally that discover it, and as the popularity of Archie waxes and wanes, people are going to want to read this. But they have reprinted it a lot, so. But it's great. Punisher meets Archie it's a really, really fun book. If you've never read it, you should check it out because it's a whole lot of fun. X-Men. I was looking at? Oh yeah, this one. X-Men 35 is a weird anomaly, at least in my opinion. I believe it's Gene Ha doing the artwork. Let me verify that. No, I'm sorry, Liam Sharp. I got that wrong. Liam Sharp's doing the artwork. And Liam, I think, was given the notes to redesign their costumes, Cyclops and Jean. And he did so, and it's fine. It's I don't think they work very well, but that's just one man's opinion. That's not saying they're abominations. But those costumes never showed up again. That's what's weird about this. It's like they appeared and they never stuck around. So they're on the cover of this issue, and maybe they went 2 issues with these looks, but they look really strange. They look like otherworld versions of Jean and Scott when they're not, and then they just went back to their normal costumes. So that's what's weird about X-Men 35. That's always stayed with me, that it was just a weird. Oh, we're looking like this now. Oh, okay. Oh no, we're not looking like that. Okay, that's great. Speaking of Larry Hama. The great Larry Hama, Wolverine 84, and it's an LCD. And what did LCD name the robot Wolverine? I forget what his name was, but I really loved in real time. I remember loving LCD. His name was Albert. That's right. LCD and Albert, the Wolverine robot. Their adventures were fabulous. I really loved when Larry created them and wrote them. I always enjoyed when they showed up. I haven't actually revisited them in a while, so I can't remember exactly what it was about them. I think it was just that she was just this precocious, charming little girl that ran around with a stabby face, silent. I think he was silent, right? Albert, killer Wolverine. And it was great. I don't know if anyone else feels that way about LCD and Wolverine, but I really, really enjoyed them. So they're on the cover of Wolverine this month. Deadpool is in the middle of his second, or actually starts his second miniseries in Deadpool issue number 1. And yeah, I think that's it for Marvel Comics.
You were saying?
Now, we're going to go over to DC Comics and see what's cracking over there. The annuals roll on, the Tales of the Dead Earth annuals. So Adventures of Superman Annual 6 features that. Deathstroke the Terminator. Legends of the Dead Earth, rather, not Tales, sorry. Legends of the Dead Earth. Deathstroke Terminator Annual 3. Could be nearing the end, because I know there were a bunch last month. That actually might be the end of it. Because remember, this would have been towards the end of the summer, like date-wise. So these would have been on the shelf throughout the whole summer. Yeah, those might have been the last two. We'll see if there are any pop up next month as well, but those were the last two. Aquaman Volume 5, Number 1. Speaking of Peter David, the very talented, he wrote this Aquaman series, and this famously is the Aquaman series where if people weren't paying attention, they said Aquaman got grim and gritty. But if they were reading it, what really happened is all the trauma caught up with him. You know, this is a guy whose son got murdered because of his antics. His wife was constantly in a state of trying to kill him. And in the early issues, I want to say it's not in this first one. I want to say it's like in issue 3. It might be in 2, but I think it's like issue 3 or 4. His hand gets eaten off by piranhas because he loses the ability to speak to the fish. So that's what this series is. And so this is the first time he got that hook, which he would sport in various iterations for at least the next 10 years. Until they kind of finally morphed it and they gave him a water hand for a while. And I loved it. I loved the hook look. I thought it was great. I thought it really worked. And then they eventually gave him like that chest armor kind of thing, which also I think really worked for him. It was good. And he got the beard. This was a really important era for Aquaman. This really broke him out of the, stuffy joke mode without acknowledging the stuffy joke stuff. In more recent years, Jeff Johns did it while acknowledging the stuff, the joke that can be Aquaman. And that also, I think, worked too. But this, I distinctly recall, this version of it was just pretty much, no, we're just going to go forward and tell cool stories with this guy because he commands the ocean. Like, there's no reason for him to be considered a joke. He really is like the ruler of an underground kingdom. And so that's what Peter leaned into. And it's a great series. And even after Peter leaves, which is closer to issue 50, Dan Jurgens comes on for about 2 years worth of issues. And Dan Jurgens' issues of Aquaman are fantastic too. This is a strong series for real. This is speaking of Punisher, we were talking about Punisher earlier. This is did we talk about Punisher? Yeah, Archie Punisher. Yeah, my brain. Punisher crossed over with the Batman. It's Batman Punisher Lake of Fire. This is one of the very few DC Marvel crossovers of the period. I say few, but there were a handful, more so than previous and more so than later. This is Batman Punisher. This is where the Punisher is teaming up with Azrael Bats. Then there's a Punisher Batman one, which I think was drawn by John Romita Jr., where it's the Punisher teaming up with Bruce Wayne Batman. So this is the DC published one. And I want to say Barry Kitson did the artwork for it. Denny O'Neil, Barry Kitson, and it's cool. I mean, I'm a sucker for these intercompany crossovers, and if there's any two characters that, well, regular Bruce Wayne Batman and a Punisher, that's going to be fireworks all the time because of the guns he uses. And so then to see that also with Azrael Bat, who kind of relied more on not necessarily guns per se, but more deadly techniques. It's great to see that dichotomy. So it was really smart that they did both versions of that crossover. So that's out on the stands this week, or this month rather. That Worlds Collide crossover continues with Superman and Icon, and that's the DC Universe, Milestone Universe crossover, which was a lot of fun to read. Robin is on issue 9. I enjoyed that Robin series, and it ran almost 200 issues, man. I enjoyed Tim Drake's solo adventures. I thought they were really great. Let's see here. It's kind of this is a good one. Remember the TV show Viper about the crime solver that drove around in a Dodge Viper? And that was the hook of it. Like, the Dodge Viper was such a cool car, which it was even more blatant than Knight Rider. They just named, at least Knight Rider was named after Knight Rider, and it wasn't called, what did it, was it Firebird or train? Was it train? No, it's a Firebird, right? I think, wasn't it? I don't know cars. So whatever Knight Rider was, they didn't call it Firebird. Viper, they just said, we don't care about the Knight Rider part or the whatever part. We're just calling it the name of the car, which was Viper. So Viper, the comic book from DC Comics, is on the stands, and that's not good. I can't say it's probably any good, but is that who I think did the cover? It is. Howard Chaykin did the cover. I thought it looked like his work. That's wild. No, never turned down a check, that's for sure. Written by Ben Schwartz. Probably not that Ben Schwartz. Penciler by Mark Matos. I'm not familiar with either of these gentlemen. The only name I recognize on here is Chris Iliopoulos, who did the letters for this issue. Yeah, Viper. First issue of an all-new 4-issue miniseries. Cars don't translate. Car adventures do not translate well into comic books. They don't. And I think it's probably pretty easy to figure out why. You know, it's a pretty static looking thing. And, you know, the movement is all in the wheels, right? So it's all in the wheels, and then the car itself is just a hunk that goes in different directions. Obviously, shooting live action, you can have some of the most exciting pieces of film caught on film. Not saying that's not exciting, but in a comic book, you're always essentially just looking at posed photos of a still thing. You know, there's no wings, there's no transformational effects. They never really draw the under. I mean, it's rare you would get an underside, I guess, if it's jumping over a ravine, but that's usually not drawn. It's just different angles of the car, you know, in speed lines. Like I guess Speed Racer gets away with it with all the speed lines, but in American comics, which, you know, weren't, I guess they're not as manga, right? That it's just not as exciting. I don't know. I mean, I say that having read a ton of US 1. I've read all of US 1. I've read all of Team America. It's hard. It's hard to draw. Even Ghost Rider, you know, you gotta add flaming wheels to the vehicle to get me to be into it, you know? G.I. Joe suffers from that sometimes. You know, there's only so many ways you can draw Awestrikers leaping over things. A lot of times the fun that we find in these books is in the battles and the positioning of the tanks, right? We talked about that a lot on the show, where some of the better battles with vehicles Larry's done is he's taken the time to illustrate the positioning of the vehicles and how they get one up on each other, not necessarily the speed of the moment, right? So if the hook of your show is the speed of the car, I don't think that translates very well to comics. It just could be just one man's opinion. You know, don't hate me because I have one. But yeah, so Viper. There you go.
You were saying?
I was. So now in June of 1994, in the movie theater, after you said, "Mom, I'm done with my comic book Viper," what are we going to go see at the movie theater? Well, if it's June 3rd, your mom is going to say, you've got a few choices. One of them is Fear of a Black Hat, which is an absolutely hilarious mockumentary about the rap world, very much like with Spinal Tap. It's very funny. She's gonna say, you want to do that? And you're going to say, I don't know. I think I'm a little young for that, Mom. And then she'll say, okay, let's go see The Endless Summer 2, which by its name is very funny, because I guess it makes sense because it never ended. So it's not like the last summer part 2, which would be even funnier. But you're going to say, Mom, I don't care about watching The Endless Summer part 2. Then she's going to say, let's go see The Cowboy Way with Woody Harrelson and Kiefer Sutherland playing cowboys in New York City. And you're going to say, Mom, I really don't want to see that. So then she's going to say, well, let's wait till next week, because next week we have both City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold, which has spawned some of the funniest like sequel jokes of all time. I think Die Hard 2 Die Harder, Die Hard 3 Die with a Vengeance, and Legend of Curly's Gold, and of course Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo. Those are like the Mount Rushmores of sequel jokes when it comes to talking movies. But yeah, on June 10th, City Slickers 2, Legend of Curly's Gold. But more importantly than that, a movie that I absolutely saw probably 8-10 times in the movie theater, and that's not an exaggeration. Speed with Keanu Reeves, Dennis Hopper, Sandra Bullock. I saw that movie so much we loved the movie Speed. Absolutely loved it. And I think with good reason, it's a great movie. It is an absolute action-packed banger of a movie. Talking about like cars and action and, just exciting car chases. Speed is great. It's funny, and it's just, Speed's awesome. Not saying it's a perfect movie, not saying it's the greatest movie in the world, but I love the movie Speed. It's so good. June 17th, it's a movie Wolf, which was a part of that Universal horror attempt to revival. They did Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, and then there was Frankenstein starring, I think it was Kenneth Branagh directed that, starring Jack Nicholson Frankenstein starred De Niro. Nicholson is in Wolf, and this was them trying to do high end versions of the old Universal horror stuff, and this one doesn't really work, but on every level it should. Although it was directed by Mike Nichols, and Mike Nichols is great. I think maybe I need to revisit this, but I remember at the time just being meh about it, which is crazy because it's got Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, which you finally get that Joker Catwoman team up. That's exciting. James Spader, Richard Jenkins is in this, David Hyde Pierce. Yeah, and directed by Mike Nichols, who's great. So yeah, maybe I need to revisit Wolf. It's been a long time since I watched it, but I just remember at the time there was just something about it that just didn't fire on all cylinders. I feel like that was the prevailing takeaway from Wolf. June 24th, The Lion King hit the theaters. That was huge, man. That was a huge movie and is great. I don't need to sell Lion King to you for real. We also had Wyatt Earp. Kevin Costner. So Wyatt Earp, directed by Lawrence Kasdan. June 25th. It's an HBO movie called Blind Justice, starring Armand Assante and Elizabeth Shue and Robert Davi. I have never seen this, but it says justice isn't only blind, it's deadly. So Armand Assante is a cowboy in the Wild West, and he's blind, and he's packing pistols on the cover of this DVD box. Blind Fury is great with Rutger Hauer as the blind martial arts guy. I don't know if Blind Justice is as good, but maybe I need to seek that out. And then on the June 29th, the Julie Roberts, Nick Nolte film, I Love Trouble. And then the film Little Big League, about the little kid who becomes the owner and manager of the Minnesota Twins. This one and the Angels in the Outfield, and the one with the pitcher, the one with the kid with the arm that fires rockets. I think that kid went on to be an American Pie. Those three movies I always get confused, but Little Big League is the one about the kid that kind of owned and managed the Twins. So that's also in theater. So some huge movies. Lion King, Speed. I mean, those two are the biggest, certainly, of the month, but I think Wolf definitely was a huge push at the time. And City Slickers 2, City Slickers 1 was fabulous. I've talked about that on the show. Love City Slickers 1. City Slickers 2, not that great, but, Jack Palance's long-lost twin brother comes back, which is awesome. So, yeah, there's some bangers.
You were saying?
And now,
mass is ready.
All right, we're talking G.I. Joe 151. And the cover is not... I'd say it's not great. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I've certainly seen worse. I like this. It's Snake Eyes in the center, and he's like hurdling Cobra Commander, like throwing his body, over his head. Cobra Commander is on fire. Remember, he got that Willie Pete on him, that white phosphorus, so was burning. So I like that. It's a reflection of the action of the previous issue, which is great. Snake Eyes, you see his face is shown, although it's not terribly scarred. I mean, it certainly has some markings, but it's not terribly scarred. It's got a red bandana on. His costume doesn't have any, there's no accoutrement, so it's really just a dude in a black leotard. Storm shadows in the bottom right corner. His swords kind of bracket the action. It's nearly impossible to tell what Snake Eyes is standing on. That's one of the things I don't like about this. I don't know if that's supposed to be the remnants of a brainwave scanner. I really don't. He's just standing on some random equipment that seems to be exploding. There's a couple of Vipers that are also poorly placed in this. The good stuff is that fire from Cobra Commander. It branches over the logo. I always enjoy when that and his hand, when that stuff breaks the logo plane. That's always fun. It's got a caption on it. It says Snake Eyes alone against Cobra Renewed. It works. I mean, that is what's going on, because remember Cobra Commander brainwashed rather Storm Shadow and his son Billy and the Baroness. And I guess, and then they put the barcode over Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow's butt. So it's kind of like the action is, I think one of the reasons I don't like this is the action is bringing you down to the bottom corner, and then the bottom corner is just the barcode. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the problems with this. I think if the barcode is on the normal position on the left side, then it's not as, it maybe works a little bit better. It's just an uneven cover. Because then your eyes would go from the upper box, because right now they go from the upper box right down the middle to the, like where you would turn the page, except you're not turning the page on the action of Storm Shadow. You're turning the page on the action of a direct edition barcode, or a direct or a newsstand, whatever. So I think, I don't know, not a keen, and there's no background on this. There's just, it's weird. Yeah. And the exploding computer thing that he's standing on doesn't help. So if anyone knows what that is, let me know. I mean, it's probably supposed to be the brainwave scanner, but it doesn't really look like anything. It just looks like a bunch of exploding equipment. Okay.
Yo, Joe!
This page, though, this splash page I can get behind. It's pretty great. It's wild, too, because Snake Eyes' hands are on fire, I'm presuming from beating on a flaming Cobra Commander. So Snake Eyes is risking the burning and melting of his own arms because he can't stop punching Cobra Commander, who is on fire from the white phosphorus that Snake Eyes fired at him last issue. That's great. In this picture, you can tell that it's Cobra Commander a little bit more because he's got at least he has the Cobra hood or Cobra logo on his face mask. Can't really see that on the cover, so he just looks like he actually looks like a robot on the cover. But in this one, it's and they also identify him as Cobra Commander. So we're getting some story recap of what's going on, and Snake Eyes as drawn on the inside. He's also got his web gear on, so he still has a knife on him. Like his body's broken up a lot more than just the gray leotard in the front too. And he's very angry. His hands are on fire.
Yo, Joe!
We get one of those nice 2-page spreads that G.I. Joe's been doing of late. It's called Cobra Renewed. I like the way they use the giant R in they turn the R in Cobra into a giant uppercase R that crosses down into the word renewed. I think that works well. Script by Larry Hama, pencils by Phil Gosier, inks by Scott Koblish. Saw Scott at the Los Angeles Comic Convention. He's always he's a talent, man. He's like the what do they say that he's the I don't want to say being there, but he's the Zelig. He's like the Zelig of the last 30 years of comic books. Scott Koblish is quietly, you see his name pop up in so many great books. And starting out as he was inking, and now he's doing great pencil work. So shout out to him. Colors by Shy, letters by Vicky Williams, editor Mike Lackey, editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco. And it's great. It's a great 2-page spread. I think it really works for me. Snake Eyes' hands are still on fire, which is wild because they don't look gloved. They look ungloved, and they're on fire. Storm Shadow's crossing the page in the middle. and a nice fun, very imagey, but still, you know, the anatomy still works for the most part. Leaping pose, swords drawn, and Billy and Cobra and Baroness are chasing him. Now, a couple things. Billy's anatomy is wild, not acceptable. It's his hips are, if you look at this picture, it is crazy how high his hips are in relation to where his head is. Like he's running literally at a 90-degree angle. Like he bent at the waist at 90, straight up 90 degrees, not an exaggeration, and is running towards the action that way. His butt is almost taller than the top of his head. I'm not exaggerating. So that's a little awkward. The Baroness is rocking one of those. She's rocking a gun that Cable would be proud of. It is just an oversized giant laser gun. And this is where, you know, I don't think stuff like that works too well with G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe is always better with more realistic guns, you know, unless the point of it is to be, hey, I built this crazy super laser gun, and that's the point of it. But otherwise, generally, you want to see, I do at least, you want to see your troopers with either the guns that they were given for the toy, which can be a little crazy, I get it, or something that's a little more recognizable, but just giant, blocky, tech-looking things that look sort of like guns. That, I don't think that works greatly with G.I. Joe. And then Mindbender's in the corner and yelling and pointing, but Mindbender's really not pointing at the action. If you look where he's pointing, his finger is, now on the page, it's diagonally going across the page. So it works. So it does work from if you were laying out angles and where your eyes are going, it actually works. But if you put everything in a 3-dimensional perspective, Mindbender needs to turn like on an axis. He needs to shift, and you could still have him, if you use his finger point as the axis, his body needs to rotate like, I don't know, 40 degrees clockwise. I don't know how to describe that, but like on a, you know, rotate his hip like towards his left. He needs to rotate his body, because I'll tell you right now, he's pointing at the wall. He's pointing at the wall and saying, you know, get him.
Yo, Joe!
Now, fun bit of swordsmanship. He got, and it's a fun panel. Storm Shadow's swords. He's carrying 2 swords. One is flipping. They're both flipping in a counterclockwise manner, but like the right hand sword takes precedent, and the left hand sword is already cut through the air. So it's like he's doing like a cyclone attack on Snake Eyes. That's pretty good. And we're using Storm Shadow as the narrator of Snake Eyes' actions here to keep us abreast of what's going on. And in Great Larry fashion, he has Storm Shadow describe the gun that Snake Eyes is carrying, which is a Heckler and Koch 9mm SMG. Oh, but Snake Eyes hesitated because he can't bring himself to kill us because he thinks we've been brainwashed. So this is all, you know, this is narrating the stuff that isn't necessarily readily apparent because Snake Eyes doesn't speak, and we don't have any thought balloons for him and things like that. The faces on this top upper left, Baroness's face, really cartoony. The glasses are way too big. Storm Shadow's face is kind of grotesque. I get why I like the acting on them, though. I'll say this. I like the acting. I like that it's kind of like Storm Shadow's kind of got a malevolent smile. Baroness also malevolent smile. Billy a satisfied smile. So that's good acting on these faces. It's just they're a little too cartoony for me. And then when you go down to the head of Mindbender here, it's like he's got an egghead. Like it is, it's way too. It's like his head is brought to you by like an H.R. Giger alien. It's weird. Like it's really over exaggerated. But that's what we've been doing, and that's what we've slowly been seeing for the last few issues. Is Phil Gosher's been experimenting more and more with that, what we call here the image style, that more exaggerated style. not necessarily grounded in realism, but more grounded in acting and effect, which he's definitely getting with that Dr. Mindbender. That's a fun piece of work, even if it's bordering cartoony.
Yo, Joe!
So Cobra Commander just wants them to just shut up and kill Snake Eyes, but Snake Eyes quickly grabs him as a hostage. And actually, we see now that Snake Eyes' hands are not on fire anymore. He was wearing gloves, so the flesh, while certainly I'm sure it wasn't very comfortable, his flesh probably has not burned off his fingertips. So he takes him prisoner. Snake Eyes takes Commander prisoner, rather, while the three brainwashed people kind of rush him on all sides. And now Cobra Commander is explaining the action. The Baroness, who reminds us is a world-class shot, does manage to wing Snake Eyes. Or no, does she? Yes, she wings him. See, she says he dodges the bullet. I look at this picture. I think she clipped his ear, to be frank. So yes, he certainly dodged the face shot, which he was going for. But I think she clipped his ear in this one, which is awesome, because then that's just more trauma and damage to Snake Eyes. So I'm there for that. So now the Vipers are chasing Snake Eyes up these stairs.
Yo, Joe!
And he does what they wouldn't expect. He throws Cobra Commander at them, so he loses his shield, but then leaps after that shield with a burst of machine gun fire. So he reclaims his Cobra Commander hostage, and attacks these Vipers back down to the floor where they were at. Cobra Commander yelling in red. I like that red use, because they've been using it. They used it on the previous page. Did they use red on the other pages? No. So in the previous page, and when Cobra Commander yelled no, it was red. And then when Snake Eyes throws him, his exclamation is red. And then now it's just straight red lettering. It's not oversized or anything, but it's just in red. It's for me, it pops, because it's just, he's that angry. There's multiple exclamation marks after each sentence, etc. And he's like, just kill, exterminate him with extreme prejudice. And we get the Baroness firing that giant gun. And the gun's so big, she's firing, like she's holding it away from her body to fire. Like she would break her wrist, kind of a thing. Like it's just too big to be, and also we're also having the compression issue here, where she's also, her head is at the level of her hips. It's just a bad time for anatomy in some cases. The 90s were. But it's open season on Snake Eyes, as she likes to say.
Yo, Joe!
Snake Eyes uses him uses Cobra Commander as a shield. Cobra Commander's got that armor, so it's ping, ping, ping. All the bullets are bouncing off of him, and he rescinds his order. And the Baroness is, again, so this is again real cartoony here. The Baroness's face is really wild. It's really, really out of whack as she's screaming at the Vipers to stop shooting. And then she's saying, keep shooting, maybe we'll get lucky, because he's in a bulletproof suit. Cobra Commander is saying, don't listen to her, she's been brainwashed. And the Baroness says, I haven't been brainwashed, I've been restored to sanity.
Yo, Joe!
Which is important, because what Mindbender did was he convinced them that they went back to normal. So he actually did the brainwash to where they thought that they were previously brainwashed, and he unbrainwashed them. So that's a little bit of trickery. Smart setup by Larry. A little bit of trickery on the part of Dr. Mindbender. But now we jump outside, and it's a little it's a little abrupt, because they haven't been doing a lot of spatial establishing moments, right? So there's no way to tell that Snake Eyes was that close to the doorway of the castle, right? Like, as far as we know, he was deep in the bowels of it when he went ham on Cobra Commander. But now we're just outside, so you have to remember that Flint and Lady J were out there with some tanks and jeeps, and so now they're fighting against the Cobras on that narrow bridge that's the only way up to the Cobra Castle. And so Snake Eyes is dragging Cobra Commander with him. and Jay's driving, Flint's firing. It's just a lot of shooting, but there was no real, hey, we're heading outside the castle moment.
Yo, Joe!
You just got to keep up. Now, Lady J does a nice little like spin out, spreading, throwing dirt. This is hilarious. So she's throwing, like, basically kicking up dirt at the Vipers, which seems to scare them off more than shooting at them does, which is pretty funny. She says, "Now, how's that for offensive driving?" Flint says, "Not bad for a girl." And she replies, "Haul Snake Eyes in. I'm not talking to you anymore," which is great. And Flint replies, there's going to be a wealth of conversation on the trip back home. Like, this is great. Now, they don't know who their prisoner is. They just know that Snake Eyes has a prisoner. Snake Eyes hauls him into the Jeep. Flint says, "Do you got a name, buddy?" And Cobra Commander says, "No." Flint replies, "Is that with two N's?" And that's when Storm Shadow comes running out of the castle. He says, "Do not fear, Cobra Commander. Your deliverance is nigh." Fun bit. The one Viper says, "Nigh?" like with a question mark. And another Viper replies with brainwave scanner. And he goes, "Oh," like they know the brainwave scanner makes people overly dramatic and Shakespearean.
Yo, Joe!
Storm Shadow catches up to the Jeep, so that's pretty cool. So he's moving that fact. Flint's catching on that it actually is Cobra Commander that they have captured. And as Storm Shadow leaps for the Jeep and is about to murder all of them, Flint does what I question. I question his, I don't know. Like, I'm not questioning his actions in the sense of how dare he do this. I'm questioning is how smart was this of him to do. So he knows the Storm Shadow's coming after him to get Cobra Commander. He throws Cobra Commander off the Jeep into the ravine, really. And he says, "If you act quickly, you can save your boss man." And Cobra Commander goes hurtling down the ravine, screaming all the way.
Yo, Joe!
As Jay puts it, or although they actually have it attributed to. Yeah, they actually attribute it to Snake Eyes, which is not, right. It's supposed to be Jay, but technically she's sitting behind Snake Eyes, so you could say it's Jay. But it says, "You threw him off the bridge." He says, "Nah, no harm done." And she says, we're the good guys. We're not supposed to do that. And he says, "Well, Storm Shadow's going to save him, right?" And in a couple panels of fun, cool ninja action, Storm Shadow does indeed save him. He dives, he throws a rope, hooks the rope, grabs Cobra Commander, swings before he can crash, against the rocks below. And Flint settles in. He says, "See, there's no violation of ethics." And Jay's response is, "You didn't know that Storm Shadow would succeed." He says, "Well, you don't know that." He goes, "Fair is fair." I go, "Then, wait, I thought you weren't talking to me. Hello." So, and also, Jay's face here is awkward. I'm not sure I'm a keen fan of Jay's face. But before we go on,
Yo, Joe!
Flint throwing him off, if he knows he's Cobra Commander and is going, "All right, we can end this whole thing now. I'll just kill Cobra Commander, and then a lot of our troubles will be over." I'm all for that. I know it's against the Geneva Convention, but that's the kind of move Flint would make. Flint throwing him off to get rid of Storm Shadow, it makes sense, except for the fact that Cobra Commander is such a high value target. You have Snake Eyes already in the Jeep. Snake Eyes isn't overly damaged at that point that they can tell. Wouldn't you hold on to, and I know it's for expedience sake because they got to get the story moving, but I would think Flint would let Snake Eyes fight off Storm Shadow and see how that fight goes, because Snake Eyes sitting right there. And if Storm Shadow makes it to the Jeep, they have a little fight, and then Flint would make the move to throw him off. But to right away go, "Oh my God, we have Cobra Commander hostage," which they've had him hostage before. It's not the first rodeo for that. To just throw him away like that is, if he's just throwing him away to throw him away, wildly irresponsible. If he's throwing him away to kill him, while certainly against Geneva Convention, I applaud it. I think that's pretty great. So now we're on to the next page. And this is a fun bit of subplot that Larry spends more time than I thought we would ever be respending on this. You guys remember Wolfgang? He's the little weasel assistant for W Land and Wakuku Land. Well, Wolfgang is in Barovia, And he's asking directions to the presidential palace. He says, someone points out where it is. He says, you can call me Wolfgang. Everyone else here does. He says it's like having a unique name like Shea, Pele, Madonna, Socrates, Snoopy. And he finds his way to the presidential palace. There's a guard who is dressed really American military, like in green drab and stuff. So it's a little off-putting. And then I think what's supposed to be the Barovian flag or symbol or something is actually covered by the text balloon. So it's a little confusing at first blush who this dude is. But he's a Barovian guard. Stops him. He says nobody gets into the presidential palace without papers. And Wolfgang produces his diplomatic, his diplomatic credentials. And the guy's and he also then he actually asks where's the toilet. So the guy tells him where to go to the toilet. And remember, don't write on the stalls. It's verboten.
Yo, Joe!
And in the toilet, our guy Wolfgang produces a bomb, very kind of cartoonishly rendered, but you have to do that for us to pick up on what it is. So it's a literally like pieces of dynamite taped together with a timer and a clock on it. It's like that traditional cartoon bomb look. And you have to do that because we need to be able to see it and understand what it is without missing a beat. We can't spend too much time. So he hides a bomb on a toilet. Don't really know what he's up to, but he washes his hands. And then as he exits, those same guards kind of grab him and give him the rough up. And this is right when President Metz shows up as the president of Barovia. And that head guard says, loitering in toilets with criminal intent. We have camps for your kind.
Yo, Joe!
And he's got a gun, pistol to his head, to Wolfgang's head. And he says, no, I'm here with a present. I'm the representative of General Liederkrantz from Waklukland and presenting President Metz with a gold watch as a token of our friendship. And so they wave the explosive wand over the watch. The watch checks out clean. So the president takes it and he's like, well, thank you. And Wolfgang's like, all right, man, I'll see you later. Don't let me hold you up. I gotta go. And he leaves. At that moment, the president decides he needs to use the restroom, enters the restroom, and quickly explodes.
Yo, Joe!
That is some explosive gas that he's using in there. So the soldiers recover relatively quickly, and they're chasing down the street. You just see the attaché hand of Wolfgang running down the street. They say, stop him. He just blew up the president. Someone else says, now this is really for our edification. He says, well, how did he do that? That watch wasn't a bomb. Someone says, well, how am I supposed to know? So this is actually answering it for us, these guys having this conversation. He says, what I do know is this means war with the treacherous W-landers. And they stop, and there's an old lady in a phone booth. And they say, hey, old lady, did you see a little slime pierogi, that's funny, of a W-lander go by here? And this old lady says, don't bother me. I'm talking to my relatives in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So if that's not a hint, if they didn't draw Destro in the next panel, that would have been a fun hint as to who that person actually was. And as they run away, the old lady morphs into this new look Destro, the biker Destro with the mohawk and the red face paint. And he's calling in to Cobra Commander, and he says, the plan, it went off planned as perfectly. He says, I gave Metz the watch with the proximity detonator in it, and as soon as he got close to the bomb, instant karma. And we learned that Cobra Commander is actually calling from a cell phone in his fighting suit because he is dangling from the approach bridge to the castle, to which Zartan replies, I'm not even going to ask. And Cobra Commander says, don't.
Yo, Joe!
So the chase is still on. Mindbender is still leading the chasing as the Joes are trying to escape. Lots of shooting, looking for alternate escape routes. Flint calls Hawk, says, can you scare us up a high burner mission, which is key.
Yo, Joe!
And And this is when Hawk this is punching it through right now. Hawk calling Joe on the emergency network, and we revisit Joe Colton, old school GI Joe Colton, and not Lady Jane, GI Jane is there working the computers. Remember, they were based out of the Empire State Building with that giant space laser. Maybe I'll save that joke for another podcast. And he puts in a request for a high burner mission, and he gives them some coordinates. They target lock. There's a giant bridge where they're going to kind of make their last stand, and they kind of stop, so everyone kind of pauses, so it's a more stable action. The Baroness calls it. She says, this is a setup. Mindbender ignores her, says, get ready to fire the missiles. And meanwhile, Hawk says, let her rip.
Yo, Joe!
And this laser pulse, it bounces off this geosynchronous orbit satellites all the way around the world, and it strikes the very front of the Cobra tank, destroying the bridge so they can't cross it. Probably looks like it cripples the tank a little bit, but it really destroys that bridge so they can't get across it. Mindbender says, I guess the Baroness wasn't too paranoid after all. Billy replies, paranoia is simply knowing the truth, Dr. Mindbender. So Billy's all in, man. Billy is fully brainwashed here.
Yo, Joe!
And now in Barovia, the troops have tracked down Wolfgang. So apparently Wolfgang was headed to President Metz with an inscribed watch. But I guess Zartan trusted that Wolfgang would go off course and go off mission. It's weird. Like, there's a weird bit of coincidence there. So Wolfgang is in a pawn shop trying to sell that watch instead of giving it to him. And the security guard catches up. He pulls Wolfgang by the collar. There's already villagers with torches out there. I like the way they render that in this middle widescreen panel. They let the coloring convey that it's torches and fire and darkness. It really gets across what's happening like right away. Wolfgang is his usual weasel self. The townspeople are yelling, get a rope. Where's the nearest lamppost? You figure they're going to hang him, string him up.
Yo, Joe!
Which they do. However, throw the rope over a lamppost. They all pull. They hoist him up. You think you're seeing a public hanging. But no, he's actually in a royal chair, which they're hoisting above them, because now that he killed stupid Metz, which they all hated their president, long live Wolfgang, they're going to, they're going to install Wolfgang as the leader of Barovia. Because we have, quote, we have been delivered from sullen mediocrity. So the ascension of Wolfgang is here, everybody.
Yo, Joe!
And meanwhile, in New York City, Roadblock and Tunnel Rat are just walking around the Empire State Building with machine guns strapped to their backs, hand grenades strapped to their chests, pistols on their chest, and as Tunnel Rat says that I don't think we need to be strapping, and Roadblock says we did. We have to remind the civilians every once in a while what a soldier's job really is. Meanwhile, I don't think soldiers are supposed to be deployed in the U.S. soil. This is an aggressive display of force here.
Yo, Joe!
Especially because really their job here is just to deliver orders to Joe Colton. So next issue, we're going to get a Joe Colton look back adventure, which is celebrating the 30th anniversary of G.I. Joe. We're talking 12-inch G.I. Joe, but that's all that Roadblock's doing here. He's just delivering papers. He's a process server. There's no reason to scare the people going about their business at the Empire State Building, but that's what it is. So he gives these papers saying, you've been recalled to active duty, sir. Here are your orders. Good luck and welcome to the team. So Joe Colton joins the G.I. Joe team, or rejoins, however you want to phrase it, the G.I. Joe team for next issue, which I'm excited to get to. We got Postbox from the Pit. So this is what earlier I mentioned. I forgot that Larry did not write issues 153 and 154. They talk about that here. It says Larry takes a well-deserved break for 153 and 154. And then they say He returns in 155 to stir up more trouble for real American heroes than you can shake a punji stick at. And that's right. I mean, they know that 155 is going to be the last issue. So they're teasing that, but they're not really saying it. We got letters from Lynn Lodall, P. Bonapace out of Ottawa, Canada, Colleen Salisbury out of Queensbury, New York, and that's it. So next issue, Joe Colton returns, reliving the very first adventures of the original Joe. See how it all began. They call it an action-packed tearjerker. Oh, I can't wait to read it. So, yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. I certainly had a good time with it. Although, you know, warts and all. But, yeah, it was fun. And we're getting there. So, till next time, now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.